A very interesting communication pattern or political pattern we see right now. Western European countries declare their support for the Polish and Lithuanian and Latvian effort to defend the EU's borders against the latest wave of migrants. But declarations of this type coming from government circles are drowned out in the liberal media by the propaganda takes of Lukashenko's regime about the alleged inhuman treatment of migrants and the humanitarian crisis, or so-called humanitarian crisis, duplicated by Western activists, journalists, and individual politicians. This is the observation made by my first guest in an article recently published on the TSOL.pl portal titled "Poland Defends the West. Nothing new." Professor David Engels is a Belgian historian and author and senior analyst at the Western Institute in Poznań. Welcome to Rachon, and lecturer for the Faculty of Administration and Security at the Jacob of Paradise University. Welcome, Professor, to TVP World. Welcome to Rachon.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation.
Professor, very interesting text that you published, and this text rocked through the Polish social media, with a very interesting take on the historical perspective of security operations on the borders of Republic of Poland. But you also claim, and we actually see it, that there is a huge difference between the attitude of the official statements of the EU governments and what is the main narrative of the Western media. What are the reasons for this paradoxical situation?
Yeah, well, the reasons are, of course, ideological reasons. It is sure that the present Polish government and the majority of the Polish people actually are on a more conservative course, which is absolutely opposed to the leftist liberal doctrine that is valid in most of France or Belgium or Germany. And so I have very often this impression that the West is not really sure whom he dislikes most, if it is Poland and Hungary and of course the Visegrad states on the one hand, or if it is the union between Russia and Belarus. And so they somehow are situated between these two extremes. So they are of course obliged to support Poland as being a fellow EU member, a fellow NATO member, and so forth. But on the other hand, this defense of Poland is absolutely opposed to their own view. I mean, since at least 2015, it has been the general view of the political elite of Western Europe that we can't even get enough migrants, and that the more migrants we get and the more open the borders are and the more humane we can consider ourselves. And so seeing a fellow country defending such a border is absolutely opposed to this mindset. And so that explains this cognitive dissonance we have on the one hand between the governments, which have to support Poland one way or the other, but on the other hand, this whole nexus of media, of individual politicians, of NGOs, who all are, of course, radically opposed to a defense of the Eastern frontier, and who insist on letting everyone in and on focusing only on the humanitarian aspects of the whole situation.
In your text, you are referring to another observation, because this this migration crisis, or so-called migration crisis, in a way is just an echo of the crisis from 2015. You are referring to the famous words about history repeating itself as a grotesque. In a way, we have this kind of situation because we used to have a flow of migrants in the numbers of millions across the Mediterranean Sea or the southern EU borders, because there is a natural flow of migrants from the directions of Africa and Central Asia. We do not have this natural path through the Belarusian border. Could you emphasize on this aspect of this whole situation being very hard to understand in a way, because there is an obvious question where those migrants from Syria and Iraq come from on the border of Poland and Belarus? This is the question you are asking in this article.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole situation is surreal. I mean, it is quite logical from a geopolitical point of view that there might be many migrants coming over the Mediterranean or through main routes such as Turkey. But having suddenly Iraqi or Syrian migrants coming through Belarus is, of course, an absolute geopolitical absurdity, which is only explainable, of course, through the systematic import of these people through the Belarusian regime and thanks to the support of Russia. Of course, we can always point the fact that the quantitative dimensions are quite different between what we lived in 2015 with these millions of people on the move and today's situation where alone the means of transportation by airplanes makes it quite difficult, of course, to have large masses amassed somewhere in the eastern Polish forest. Nevertheless, it is also quite sure that Poland is absolutely right in refusing to playing the game of Lukashenko and letting these people enter, because at least by saying an absolute stop, Poland can make sure that this migration is limited to some tens of thousands of people, and that we will not have a new massive influx that could very soon, of course, number not only tens of thousands but very rapidly also hundreds of thousands if the border is open and if the news spreads. I mean, the situation was quite similar in 2015. If in 2015 the European nations had said, no, we do not want any form of illegal immigration, we want everything to go through the proper political channels to be sure who comes in and who comes not in, and to impose also a migration politics more on the basis of what Australia has, then I'm quite sure we would never have seen millions of people on the move. This word would have spread very rapidly, and after some tens or perhaps maximum 100,000 of people, all the others would have known, no, that is not possible. They defend their border, so we stay where we are and we use the facilities that exist in our countries through the embassies and through other institutions in order to legally demand some forms of asylum. So I think that is a message that Poland has very clearly shown, and which has to be added also, which Hungary has also very clearly shown by defending its borders also in 2015. And it can't stress enough that this is an important example for the Western European population, which has been fed on the narrative, we cannot defend our borders in the modern society. Now we have seen that it's not
Professor,
possible.
there's a question if this is a real example, because you placed on your social media a very interesting picture with a very interesting comment. We can show it in a second. That the fact that the Polish border is being protected right now, and the fact that at least part of the migrants are coming back to the Iraq, means that borders can be protected. And this is exactly opposite towards things that were said back in 2015, when we've heard that there is no way to protect the EU borders because this just cannot be done. Actually, this whole situation shows those borders can be protected indeed. And it puts authors of those words from 2015 in very awkward position.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for many people in Western Europe who may perhaps still have believed that the elite, like Angela Merkel, somehow could be believed in, and that indeed borders cannot be defended. Well, these people now have been shown by the example of Poland, exactly as was the case before with Hungary also, that borders can be defended. Of course, there is always some form of quantitative difference between the quite limited Polish-Belarusian border with some tens of thousands of migrants and this enormous Mediterranean space, where it is, of course, much more difficult also to ensure any form of defense. But nevertheless, it has been shown that something like this is possible, and that with enough concerted effort and enough political decision making, also borders can be defended. And that is also one of the reasons why the Western European political elites hate now or hate even more the Polish government, because it has shown them to be utterly wrong. And so that is why they want, of course, to ensure many forms of exceptions, of humanitarian aids, of letting some people in, showing at least small children, letting journalists be there, in order to erode step by step this border defense and justify, thanks to this, their own decisions in 2015.
Professor, there's also another very interesting question. At least this is the question that comes to my mind when I'm witnessing this whole strange narrative and difference between official narrative of the governments and the unofficial narrative of at least the part of the mainstream media in the Western world. We do have an official statements of, for example, German labor agency claiming that Germany needs 400,000 migrants yearly to put their economy on the level that they want to keep it. It means that if we as a European Union are going to protect our borders, we are not going to have this big amount of migrants coming into Germany. It means that probably, it looks like, protecting of the borders might be against the official political doctrine of Germany, which might just explain the reasons for which we have this strange situation right now. What's your take on this situation?
Yeah, well, I think that these claims that Germany needs migrants is purely ideological. It has been shown very clearly that even 1 year after 2015, even after letting 2 million people into Germany, most of them hadn't found or hadn't been given any form of job. So I mean, it would have been wonderful normally for most enterprises to have this huge job force. But indeed, it is quite attested that most of them still stay where they are. That is, they depend on forms of social aid or of some little jobs here and there. So this claim is clearly false. And is also even more absurd in a situation of economic decline, which is also hitting Germany very strongly for the moment. We can expect really big problems also in all of Europe during the next month because of this. And for the moment, in the journals, you only see one information after the other informing us that 10,000 people have lost their job here, 5,000 have lost their job there. The whole automobile sector is crumbling in Germany because of the ecologist take that has been taken by the German government. So I think Germany is much more in the phase of economic contraction, and this pretension that Germany would need 400,000 migrants or so to stabilize anything is of course absolutely absurd. Everyone knows this, even more so as it is clear that these people coming to Germany or to Europe to their largest part do not know the language, are very often very poorly formed, do not necessarily have also the right working doctrine, and so they are not at all prepared. They cannot be compared at all with high-skilled and well-educated European workers. So this is pure, I would say, pure propaganda. We cannot simply replace 400 high-skilled, highly trained German workers with 400 migrants coming from all over the world, and certainly not in a period of economic contraction where we see more and more jobs being lost for the moment.
Professor, my two final questions. One is on the very nature of the creating of this conflict. The analyst of the situation on Kremlin must have noticed that the migration issue divides European Union. So it looks like it was the reason for which the migration flow, artificial migration flow, was used as a tool against European Union. This is also a challenge for the European community, despite the fact that we have different views on migrations. What's your take?
Well, I think there are two sides to this. On the one hand, the Kremlin analysts who have decided upon that plan have been, of course, quite intelligent. They have noticed that that one of the major rifts within the European population is the take concerning migration. Do we need more? Do we need less? Do we want to have a European identity, or do we rather want to have a multicultural identity? They've identified that that is one of the major big problems within the European citizenship, and that using migration and artificially created migration as a lever could provoke very interesting effects in dividing society. So from that point of view, strategically, this is quite understandable and quite intelligent. What they did not really realize, I think, is that that for many conservatives, essentially in Europe and in Western Europe, seeing Russia and Belarus using migration as a tool against Europe is contradicting everything that the Kremlin has built up in propaganda during the last years. Many people in France or in Germany still see Vladimir Putin as the one who is defending Christian identity, European values, true traditional European values against multiculturalism or Islam or so. I mean, this is
this is one of the most important keys of his propaganda. That's true.
Yeah,
this is the way he wants to present himself.
Exactly, and so many people really also believed in this more Christian message. And now seeing that precisely he and his entourage use now migration in a very cynical way against Europe, also discredits his own position. So I know many people who are quite now disappointed in saying, well, we could have awaited, or we could have expected, for example, a political take on gas, on energy, some forms of retaliation towards Europe in order to punish Europe for not accepting Lukashenko. But using migration, using human life in order to force even more Muslim migrants upon Europe clashes really with this self-representation as the defender of Christian Europe. So I think this is a very double-edged sword that has been used, and that is not altogether to the advantage of the Russian popularity in Europe.
President, my final question. In your text, you are claiming that the defense of those borders right now gives no glory that defenders of the European borders had in the past. But despite that, it is a very important thing to defend those borders, because those are the fundamental issues for every sovereign state. And in a way, it is also fundamental for the EU. Could you emphasize on that as we finish our conversation?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, of course, there's a big difference in defending Europe in the 17th century, when we had armies fighting each other, when we had the Polish army clashing with the Ottoman army before Vienna. That was something where you could really get some form of celebrity and of glory and so forth. Now the situation is, of course, very different. We have this situation of poorly fed young men who want to come into Europe. They want just to go through Poland, to go to Germany, so barring their way somehow. That's not, of course, a honorable fight between equals. It is a very asymmetrical fight, and so it's quite different, of course, to what an army would like to do, to have a honorable and glorious fight on the one hand. But on the other hand, it is absolutely necessary. A state which ceases to defend its borders and to have its law respected ceases to have any form of credibility. And what strikes me so much, and I think that must have stricken also many people, or struck many people in Poland, is to see this strange combination between, on the one hand, the violence of these migrants who really wish to go into Europe at all costs, even if that means clashing with the police, killing or wounding people, not respecting barriers and borders and so forth. And on the other hand, that these same people want to go to Europe in order to benefit from social help, and they basically want they ask us about to having arms somehow. And so
one of many paradoxes of the European migration policy, in a way. Professor, thank you very much for your presence on Rachon. See you next time. This process is developing, so probably we are going to have a chance to talk again. Thank you very much.
With pleasure. Thank you.